Along the southern edge of the Mediterranean Sea, where the water turns from deep blue to a bright, foaming green near the shore, lies a coastline shaped not only by wind and tide, but by imagination. For thousands of years, travellers have arrived here by ship, watching the land appear slowly out of the haze, a thin line of pale sand, then the faint outline of buildings, then the full shape of a great port city rising from the horizon. They were sailing toward Alexandria. Yet for many of us today, Alexandria exists less as a physical place and more as an idea, a shimmering memory of a world that valued knowledge so intensely that it attempted something almost unimaginable, to gather all the written wisdom of humanity into one library, one city, one sanctuary of thought. The city we picture is partly real, partly myth, a city of marble colonnades, sunlight falling through long courtyards, scholars walking beneath painted porticos. A city with the great lighthouse, the Pharos, gleaming like a star by day and by night. A city where poets debated philosophy and mathematicians measured the earth. Much of this image is drawn from ancient writers, Strabo, Plutarch, Athenaeus, each describing an Alexandria shaped by their own perspective. Strabo, visiting in the early Roman period, spoke of its beautiful plan and its broad, carefully aligned streets. Plutarch, writing of Julius Caesar, described the harbour choked with ships and smoke during the Alexandrian War. Athenaeus, centuries later, remembered its feasts, banquets and learned gatherings. Other parts of the Alexandria that lives in our imagination come from archaeology. Broken columns beneath the water, blocks of white limestone found off the coast where the Pharos once stood, fragments of statues pulled from the harbour silt. But the truth is deeper and more fragile than the legends. The Library of Alexandria truly existed. It changed the ancient world, and it truly disappeared. This documentary is the story of both the rise of a city and the fading of a dream. To understand why the library mattered, we must first understand why Alexandria existed at all. And for that, we must return to the moment a young conqueror, barely in his 20s, stepped onto a sunlit shore and imagined a future no one else could see. Alexander III of Macedon, Alexander the Great, did not come to Egypt seeking to build a city. He came in pursuit of conquest, empire, and legacy. But in 331 BC, as he marched through Egypt with an army weary from victory, he paused on a narrow stretch of land between the Mediterranean Sea and Lake Marotis. The coastline curved gently, protected by a long island offshore. The air smelled of salt and silt. The light shimmered across the water. According to the Roman historian Arrian, Alexander believed he had been guided to this place by divine inspiration. Other sources, like Plutarch, describe him dreaming of a city famed among men, one that would outshine all others. Whatever the truth, Alexander sensed potential. The site was extraordinary, a deep natural harbour sheltered by the island of Pharos. Strabo later described this harbour as one of the most perfect in the Mediterranean, spacious, calm, and easily defended. Access to the Nile through Lake Marotis. Goods could be moved from the interior of Egypt straight to the sea. A raised ridge of land for building wide streets. Unlike many tangled ancient cities, Alexandria could be planned like a geometric ideal. Alexander ordered his architect Dinocrates to design a city layout worthy of a world empire. Egypt had long been the breadbasket of empires, producing harvests from the Nile floodplain that fed millions. Under the Ptolemies, grain shipments passed through Alexandria's warehouses and harbours before being exported across the sea. The city grew wealthy from this trade, and that wealth, in turn, supported something unprecedented, a state-sponsored sanctuary for knowledge. Ptolemy Soter, successor to Alexander, envisioned a scholarly institution that would elevate his kingdom and rival the intellectual achievements of Athens. He invited mathematicians, astronomers, poets, physicians, and philosophers to live and work in the city under royal patronage. His son, Ptolemy II, Philadelphus, expanded this mission further, building structures, funding research, and binding the pursuit of knowledge to the identity of the state. The heart of this project was the Mouseion, a place dedicated to the Muses, the divine patrons of inspiration. The Mouseion functioned as a research institute centuries ahead of its time. Scholars lived communally, dined together, received stipends, and were exempt from civic burdens. They moved through colonnaded courtyards, discussing astronomy, mathematics, natural philosophy, linguistics, and medicine. Their collaboration was not limited by discipline. The pursuit of knowledge was understood as a unified endeavor, where the movement of stars might inform poetry, and philology might illuminate geometry. Beside the Mouseion stood the Royal Library, an institution whose name would echo through millennia and become synonymous with human knowledge itself. Though its exact appearance is lost to time, ancient authors such as Strabo and Galen describe it as a vast, ordered repository containing hundreds of thousands of scrolls. These scrolls were stored in wooden cabinets along the walls. Each was labelled with a tag indicating its title and origin. Some were rare texts acquired at great cost. Others were copies painstakingly produced by scribes using fine reed pens and ink mixed from soot and gum. The collection grew rapidly, in part because of the Ptolemies' aggressive acquisition policies. Ships entering Alexandria were required to surrender any manuscripts they carried. Scribes copied them, delivering the copies back to the owners and keeping the originals in the library. With this influx of material, the scholars of the Mouseion began a process that would shape the transmission of knowledge for centuries. They compared manuscripts, corrected errors, identified interpolations, and attempted to reconstruct the most authentic versions of classical works. Their efforts produced critical editions of Homer's epics, catalogues of literature, treatises on geography, astronomical calculations, and medical texts. Figures such as Callimachus, who created the Pinnaces, a bibliographic catalogue of authors and works, laid the foundations for library science itself. Eratosthenes measured the Earth's circumference with a level of accuracy astonishing for his time. Aristarchus proposed a heliocentric model of the solar system. Herophilus performed anatomical studies that advanced the understanding of human physiology. The library was not merely a repository, it was a laboratory. Beyond the intellectual elite, Alexandria was a vibrant, cosmopolitan metropolis where cultures mingled in every marketplace and alleyway. Egyptians, Greeks, Jews, Syrians, Libyans, Cypriots, and others lived in quarters distinguished by language, religion, and tradition. The Jewish community, in particular, became one of the most significant in the ancient world, and it was in Alexandria that the Hebrew scriptures were translated into Greek, an undertaking known as the Septuagint, commissioned under Ptolemy II. At the same time, the cult of Serapis emerged as a deliberate fusion of Greek and Egyptian religious elements, a symbol of the city's hybrid identity. The streets echoed with the calls of merchants, the laughter of children, the chanting of priests, and the rhythmic strokes of oars as ships entered and departed the harbours. Bakers prepared bread from Mareotic grain, while artisans carved sculptures and fashioned pottery for export. The smell of incense drifted from the temples, mixing with the scent of fish markets and sea salt. Alexandria was a place where daily life was saturated with the awareness of scale, of being part of a city that mattered, a city that stood at the center of the ancient world. Yet the most breathtaking sight rose above all of this, the Lighthouse of Pharos. Towering over the harbour entrance, it was one of the tallest structures of antiquity and renowned as one of the 7 wonders of the world. By day, sunlight reflected off its white stone. By night, a massive fire burned at its summit, its glow intensified by polished bronze mirrors. Sailors approaching Alexandria could see its light from miles away. The lighthouse was more than a navigational aid. It was a declaration of the city's presence, a monument to engineering, ambition, and the human desire to illuminate the unknown. As the city reached its peak under the early Ptolemies, its intellectual and cultural life flourished. Debates in the Mouseion spilled into the courtyards. Scholars corresponded with intellectuals across the Mediterranean, exchanging ideas that transcended borders. Royal patronage allowed them to pursue research without fear of financial ruin, while the library's growing collection offered resources unmatched anywhere else. For a moment in history, Alexandria became the center of the world's learning, a beacon as bright as the lighthouse itself. But no city remains untouched by the passage of time. Political rivalries, shifting alliances, wars, and cultural tensions would eventually erode the foundations that supported Alexandria's intellectual empire. The world that Alexander envisioned, orderly, rational, enduring, would face threats both external and internal. In the centuries to come, the library would endure fires, neglect, and ideological conflict. The Mouseion would decline. And scholars who once walked its porticos would watch the city around them transform into something very different from the vision that had guided its creation. Yet even as the world changed, Alexandria remained luminous. It was a place where knowledge was not merely preserved, but pursued, where inquiry was considered a noble act, and where generations of thinkers shaped the contours of history. The city's story is not just one of loss, but one of extraordinary achievement, a testament to what becomes possible when a society chooses to value ideas as deeply as power. The rise of Alexandria transformed Egypt from an ancient land of temples and pharaohs into a crossroads of cultures. Although the grandeur of Thebes and Memphis had defined earlier eras, the new capital represented a different kind of power. Trade, scholarship, and administration blended into a single engine of influence. Caravans arrived from the desert routes carrying incense, spices, and textiles. Ships brought timber, copper, honey, and wine. And through these networks, ideas, myths, technologies, philosophies flowed just as readily as physical goods. Ancient sources speak of Alexandria as a place where all the world meets, and walking its streets would have confirmed this impression. Markets hummed with many languages, and even within a single shop, a buyer might encounter Greek numbers, Egyptian weights, and Phoenician measures. The city's multicultural energy shaped its religious and social landscape. Egyptians maintained temples dedicated to long-standing deities, some of which trace their origins back thousands of years. Greek settlers brought their own pantheon, filling the city with gymnasia, theatres, and sanctuaries modelled after those in the Aegean. Meanwhile, Alexandria's large Jewish community formed an intellectual tradition of its own, studying scripture and producing commentaries that would later influence Western religious thought. The Ptolemies encouraged this diversity, understanding that tolerance, at least in controlled measure, strengthened loyalty and stability. But the blending of cultures also led to tensions beneath the surface, the kind that would flare in later centuries. At the heart of the city's intellectual life, the Mouseion and the library stood as symbols of human curiosity. Scholars arrived from across the Greek world and beyond, drawn by the promise of resources unmatched anywhere else. They found themselves in an environment where debate was not only permitted, but expected. Questions that elsewhere might have been dismissed or even discouraged were entertained in Alexandria with a seriousness bordering on reverence. What is the shape of the earth? How does the human body function? What causes eclipses? How can language be analyzed and improved? These inquiries were not abstract exercises. They were the work of a society determined to understand its place in the world. Eratosthenes, perhaps the most famous librarian of Alexandria, exemplified this spirit. Using shadows cast in distant cities and the distance between them, he calculated the circumference of the earth to an accuracy astonishing for the 3rd century BCE. His method relied not only on mathematics, but also on geography, astronomy, and the library's vast written records. Meanwhile, other scholars refined the texts of classical authors. Aristarchus proposed that the earth revolved around the sun, though his ideas did not gain wide acceptance in his time. Herophilus studied the nervous system through human dissection, a practice rarely permitted elsewhere. The cumulative effect of this work was profound. Alexandria became a place where knowledge was not simply preserved, but actively transformed. The library itself, filled with scrolls arranged by subject and author, must have carried a particular atmosphere. The smell of ink and papyrus filled the air. Scribes worked meticulously to copy texts, sometimes producing multiple versions for comparison. Quiet murmurs echoed through the halls as scholars read aloud, an essential part of studying in the ancient world. The building represented the memory of humanity, a repository not only of Greek literature but also of Egyptian wisdom, Mesopotamian astronomy, and works from regions as distant as Persia and India. While later Romanticism may have exaggerated the number of scrolls, there is little doubt that the collection was vast and influential. As the Ptolemaic dynasty continued, Alexandria's reputation grew. Its harbours bustled with activity. The lighthouse, towering above them, served both as a navigational guide and a declaration of the city's presence. Merchants, missionaries, soldiers, and scholars arrived daily, each bringing new perspectives. The Ptolemies themselves cultivated an image of refinement, sponsoring festivals, athletic competitions, and philosophical gatherings. Yet political instability lurked behind the facade. Succession disputes and rival claimants periodically shook the kingdom. Royal siblings often became enemies, and alliances shifted with alarming speed. The city's stability depended heavily on the dynasty's ability to maintain unity. Despite these challenges, Alexandria thrived, reaching a cultural height unmatched in the ancient world. Its influence spread far beyond Egypt's borders. The Septuagint, the Greek translation of Hebrew scriptures, was produced here under royal patronage and would later shape Christian theology. Greek poetry flourished in Alexandria, with writers developing new literary forms that departed from the epic traditions of earlier centuries. Science and mathematics advanced through collaboration and debate. The city's intellectual output became the cornerstone of later scholarship, preserved in the works of authors who cited Alexandrian thinkers long after the library's decline. But brilliance often invites conflict. As Alexandria grew, so did the pressures upon it. The world beyond Egypt shifted. Rome expanded across the Mediterranean, absorbing territories and asserting political dominance. Trade routes changed. Egyptian society itself evolved under the influence of Greek and Macedonian rule. And within Alexandria, competition among ethnic groups and ideological factions sowed divisions that would eventually erupt into violence. The great institutions of knowledge, though admired, were not immune to these tensions. Their existence depended on royal patronage, and as the political climate changed, so too did the fortunes of the Library and the Mouseion. Still, for generations, Alexandria remained a beacon. Travellers arriving by ship saw the lighthouse rise before them, gleaming in the sunlight or blazing with fire by night. As they entered the harbours, they encountered a city unlike any other, one that aspired to collect all human knowledge and place it within reach of anyone who sought it. The ambition was extraordinary, and even though the modern world knows the library mostly through stories of loss, its existence left an imprint on intellectual history that cannot be overstated. There were moments in the early centuries when the city's energy must have felt almost overwhelming. Crowded streets filled with merchants, scholars debating in shaded courtyards, priests processing through temple gates, children running between market stalls. Alexandria embodied the idea of a metropolis before the word truly existed. It was a place defined not by walls or rulers, but by the movement of people and the exchange of ideas. Its rise marked a turning point in history, when knowledge became a tool of statecraft and scholarship became an act of collective identity. Yet beneath the surface of this brilliance, small cracks began to appear. As Rome's influence grew, Alexandria's autonomy diminished. Political struggles in the Ptolemaic court weakened the city's internal stability. Rivalries between generals, queens, and foreign powers pushed the kingdom toward dependence on Roman intervention. The intellectual community noticed these shifts. Royal stipends became less secure. Patronage fluctuated. The work of the Mouseion continued, but the environment that had supported it for generations began to change. Meanwhile, philosophical schools outside Alexandria gained prominence. Athens remained important, and centers like Pergamon emerged as rivals. The famous story of the Pergamene library competing with Alexandria's may have been exaggerated, but it reflects a broader truth. The age of unquestioned Alexandrian dominance was passing. Even so, the city's legacy endured. Scholars trained in Alexandria carried its methods to other parts of the Mediterranean. Scientific ideas developed here continued to influence intellectual thought for centuries. As Egypt slipped under Roman control, Alexandria stood at a crossroads. Its streets remained busy, its harbours active, and its cultural life vibrant. But the world around it had shifted, and the city would soon face events that would reshape its identity, challenge its institutions, and leave an indelible mark on its legacy. Under Roman rule, Alexandria remained a city of staggering importance. Its harbours supplied grain to the empire, feeding the population of Rome itself. Roman officials, merchants, and soldiers walked the same streets once travelled by the scholars of the Mouseion. The city's wealth ensured a degree of political leverage, and emperors understood that maintaining Alexandria's stability was essential. Strabo, who visited during the early years of Roman control, described the city with admiration, noting its size, order, and the unique mixture of cultures that defined it. Yet even as prosperity continued, the intellectual community began to sense that something fundamental was shifting. The Library and Mouseion had always depended on royal patronage. Under the Ptolemies, scholarly pursuits were woven into the identity of the state. The Romans, however, viewed scholarship differently. They admired Greek learning, but had little interest in maintaining vast institutions at great expense. Although scholars still worked in Alexandria and texts continued to circulate, the old system of stipends and communal living slowly eroded. The library did not vanish overnight, but the foundations of its stability weakened. For the first time since its creation, the future of the institution felt uncertain. Even so, knowledge continued to circulate through the city. Students gathered to study mathematics, astronomy, philosophy, and medicine. Teachers passed down methods that had originated centuries earlier. Work on grammar and textual criticism persisted. But increasingly, scholars operated in a fragmented intellectual landscape. The cohesive environment that had characterized the early Mouseion no longer existed. Some pursued independent research, others served wealthy patrons or taught in more modest settings scattered throughout the city. The idea of a single unified center of learning gradually unraveled. At the same time, Alexandria's multicultural society became more volatile. Under Roman occupation, tensions between Greeks, Egyptians, and Jews intensified. These groups, long intertwined in daily life, now found themselves competing for recognition and influence. Ancient accounts describe episodes of violence sparked by political disputes, economic pressures, or religious disagreements. The city's diversity, once its strength, became a source of instability, Alexandria's population, which had thrived on exchange and interaction, now struggled under the weight of competing identities. The Roman Empire itself was changing, and Alexandria changed with it. New philosophies spread through the city, drawing followers from different communities. Mystery religions attracted converts. Early Christian groups began to form, meeting in private homes and writing texts that circulated quietly among believers. For these emerging communities, Alexandria's intellectual resources provided fertile ground. They debated doctrine, interpreted scripture, and developed theological frameworks that would influence Christian thought for centuries. The city that had once shaped the classical world now found itself shaping a new religious landscape. The process was gradual, but it altered the city's identity profoundly. Classical scholarship continued, but it increasingly existed alongside new forms of thought. Philosophers, theologians, and teachers often engaged with one another, sometimes in harmony, sometimes in conflict. The library scrolls remained relevant, but new texts entered circulation, reflecting the changing priorities of society. Alexandria was becoming less a guardian of the ancient world and more a crucible for emerging traditions. Throughout these transitions, the Serapeum stood as a symbol of continuity. Located on a hill overlooking the city, it served as both a temple and an intellectual center. Within its walls, priests conducted rituals, philosophers lectured, and students gathered to learn. The Serapeum housed part of the library's collection, a daughter library that supplemented the main institution. It remained an important site for study even as the fortunes of the Mouseion shifted. Yet the Serapeum also embodied Alexandria's hybrid culture, combining Greek architectural elements with Egyptian religious symbolism. In a city increasingly divided along cultural and religious lines, the Serapeum represented a fragile equilibrium. Meanwhile, the broader Mediterranean world became more turbulent. Political instability in Rome affected the provinces, and Egypt was no exception. Emperors rose and fell with alarming speed. Civil wars disrupted the flow of trade. Alexandria experienced riots that left parts of the city damaged. Even so, it remained a vital center of commerce and learning. The harbor continued to supply grain to Rome, and scholars maintained the traditions of earlier centuries, though with diminishing institutional support. As late antiquity approached, the intellectual landscape of Alexandria grew increasingly complex. Pagan philosophers, Christian theologians, Jewish scholars, and various philosophical schools interacted in ways that were sometimes cooperative, sometimes confrontational. Teachers held lectures in public spaces or private courtyards, drawing students from across the region. Debates might focus on the nature of the cosmos, the interpretation of sacred texts, or the meaning of virtue. This overlapping of traditions produced an environment rich in ideas, but also fraught with tension. Competing visions of truth coexisted uneasily. Amid these shifting dynamics, individual scholars continued to distinguish themselves. Commentators on Aristotle refined philosophical interpretations that would influence medieval thought. Mathematicians extended earlier theories, ensuring that Alexandrian methods survived even as institutional support waned. Physicians studied anatomy and physiology, drawing on centuries of accumulated knowledge. The intellectual spirit of Alexandria persisted, though the conditions that had once supported it, state funding, unified institutions, an atmosphere of shared purpose, were fading. Political and social pressures increasingly shaped the city's future. As Christianity gained prominence in the Roman Empire, ideological conflicts intensified. Pagan rituals faced restrictions. Public debate became more polarized. The city's diverse communities, once bound together by commerce and shared space, now found themselves separated by belief. And as these divisions deepened, the great institutions that had defined Alexandria's golden age grew more vulnerable. The gradual decline of the library cannot be attributed to a single catastrophe. Ancient sources are vague, contradictory, or biased. Some mention fires, others describe neglect or ideological conflict. What is clear is that the library's dissolution occurred over centuries, not days. Scrolls were lost through political upheaval, war, and simple disuse. The intellectual unity that had sustained the institution fragmented. The dream of gathering all human knowledge into one place slowly faded. But even as the main library's influence waned, Alexandria's spirit endured in unexpected ways. Smaller collections, private libraries, and institutions like the Serapeum preserved aspects of the city's intellectual tradition. Scholars who had trained in Alexandria carried its methods to other regions, ensuring that its legacy continued. The city remained a center of learning, though its character had changed dramatically since the days of the early Ptolemies. Into this world stepped one of the most remarkable figures associated with Alexandria, a philosopher whose clarity of thought and teaching left a lasting imprint on students and scholars alike. Her presence in the city marked a final moment of brilliance before the intellectual landscape shifted irrevocably. Before her story unfolds, the city itself must be understood in its late antique form, still vibrant, still influential, but standing on the edge of transition, shaped by forces that would soon redefine the ancient world. By the late 4th century, Alexandria had become a city defined by contrasts. Its streets still bustled with merchants and artisans, its harbours still carried ships across the Mediterranean, and its schools continued to attract students from distant regions. Yet beneath the surface, ideological battles reshaped public life. Christianity, once a minority faith, had become a dominant force within the empire. Pagan traditions, long intertwined with Alexandria's identity, now faced increasing pressure. At the same time, philosophical inquiry persisted, but it did so in an environment more contentious than ever before. Within this evolving world, one figure rose to prominence as a bridge between intellectual eras: Hypatia of Alexandria. A mathematician, astronomer, and philosopher, she was educated in the traditions of Greek thought and inherited the legacy of the great scholars who had shaped the city's past. Her father, Theon, had been associated with the Museum and was one of the last known members of that institution. He edited and commented on classical works, and it was under his guidance that Hypatia developed her mastery of mathematics and philosophy. Hypatia's presence in Alexandria became a symbol of continuity. She lectured on Plato, Aristotle, and the principles of geometry, drawing crowds of students who admired her clarity and eloquence. Her teachings transcended religious boundaries. She educated pagans, Christians, and Jews alike. Contemporary accounts describe her as a woman of remarkable intellect and integrity. Synesius of Cyrene, one of her students who later became a Christian bishop, wrote letters praising her wisdom and seeking her advice on scientific and philosophical matters. In an age of ideological conflict, Hypatia represented a form of scholarship rooted in universal principles rather than sectarian division. Her lectures were held in public spaces where anyone with the desire to learn could attend. Students engaged with her not only in formal instruction, but in conversations about ethics, astronomy, and the nature of knowledge. She worked on instruments such as the astrolabe, refining tools used to study the heavens. Her intellectual presence offered a vision of Alexandria that echoed the city's earlier ideals, a place where thought flowed freely, where inquiry was not constrained by dogma, and where individuals sought truth through reasoned debate. Yet the Alexandria of Hypatia's time was no longer the harmonious crossroads it had once been. The rise of competing religious factions, combined with long-standing cultural and political tensions, created an unstable atmosphere. Public disputes often escalated into violence. Governors struggled to maintain order. clerical authorities and civic officials found themselves in conflict over jurisdiction and influence. The very idea of what Alexandria should be and whose vision should guide it became a source of ongoing contest. In this turbulent environment, Hypatia occupied a precarious position. Her reputation as a philosopher earned her respect, but it also placed her at the center of political currents she did not seek to navigate. She advised Orestes, the governor of Alexandria, on civic matters and scientific questions. This association led some to perceive her as a political figure, even though her work remained focused on teaching and research. As tensions escalated between Orestes and Cyril, the influential bishop of Alexandria, Hypatia found herself drawn unwillingly into the conflict. Ancient sources differ in their descriptions of these events, but they agree on one point: Hypatia's prominence made her a target. In a city already strained by sectarian tension, her intellectual independence and connections across cultural lines became vulnerabilities. The tragic violence that ended her life did not arise from her philosophy, but from the political turmoil that consumed Alexandria. Her death marked a symbolic moment, often interpreted as the end of Alexandria's classical intellectual tradition. Yet reducing Hypatia's legacy to her final moments overlooks the richness of her contributions. She represented the continuation of a scholarly lineage that stretched back to the earliest days of the library. She embodied the spirit of inquiry that had defined Alexandria for centuries, and even after her death, the influence of her ideas persisted through her students, many of whom carried Alexandrian methods into the wider world. The city itself continued to evolve, shaped by forces both internal and external. The rise of Christianity reshaped its institutions. Pagan temples were repurposed, including the Serapeum, which became a focal point of ideological conflict. The Serapeum had long functioned as both a religious and intellectual center, housing part of the library's collection and serving as a site of philosophical study. Its destruction, described by ancient sources such as Herophilus, symbolized a turning point in Alexandria's history. Though accounts vary in detail, the event represented the growing dominance of new religious and political structures. As these transformations unfolded, Alexandria's physical landscape also changed. Fires, riots, invasions, and natural disasters altered the city's layout. Earthquakes damaged the Lighthouse of Pharos, and over time, much of the royal quarter sank beneath the waters of the harbour. Yet despite these losses, the memory of Alexandria's classical age survived through writings, traditions, and the enduring fascination of later generations. Travellers who visited the city in late antiquity described a place where traces of past grandeur remained visible amid the new order. Scholars continued to teach in smaller circles. Libraries survived in private homes and modest institutions. The spirit of inquiry lived on, though without the extensive support of earlier centuries. Alexandria adapted to the shifting currents of history, even as its golden age receded into memory. While the great library that once stood beside the Mouseion gradually faded from the historical record, the idea of Alexandria as a symbol of knowledge endured. Medieval and Renaissance scholars revered the city as a model of intellectual aspiration. Writers imagined its halls filled with scholars debating the mysteries of the universe. Philosophers cited its achievements. And for centuries, the city's loss came to represent the vulnerability of human knowledge, the ease with which learning could be scattered or destroyed. Yet Alexandria's story is not one of simple decline. Its influence persisted in the scientific, philosophical, and literary traditions that shaped later civilizations. The methods developed by Alexandrian scholars informed the work of Islamic scientists, medieval scribes, and Renaissance thinkers. The city's legacy flowed through Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East, carried by the ideas of those who studied its texts or sought to emulate its model. The waters that now cover parts of ancient Alexandria hold remnants of its past. Over the last few decades, archaeologists have discovered submerged structures in the harbour, columns, statues, temple foundations, and fragments of the royal palace. These underwater ruins reveal a world frozen in collapse, offering glimpses of courts, walkways, and ceremonial spaces where the city's rulers once moved. They serve as reminders that history endures, even when its monuments fall. Modern excavations on land have uncovered additional evidence of Alexandria's layered heritage. Streets from different eras intersect. Foundations of temples lie beneath newer buildings. Artifacts reflect the city's multicultural identity. Greek inscriptions beside Egyptian iconography, Roman architectural fragments beside early Christian relics. The material record testifies to the complexity of Alexandria's past and the resilience of its people. The story of Alexandria is a story of creation, transformation, and legacy. It is a reminder that cities, like ideas, evolve. They rise through vision and collaboration. They endure through adaptation, and they leave traces that shape the world long after their structures fade. Alexandria's contributions to knowledge, culture, and global exchange continue to resonate, demonstrating that the pursuit of understanding can transcend the limits of time and circumstance. In the centuries since its founding, Alexandria has remained a symbol of human curiosity. Its achievements inspire scholars and storytellers. Its tragedies warn of the fragility of intellectual institutions. The image of the library, its scrolls, its scholars, its ambitions, endures as a powerful expression of what humanity can accomplish when learning is valued and protected. The modern city that bears its name occupies much of the ancient coastline, but beneath streets, buildings, and waves lie the echoes of a place that once brought the world together. To walk its ground today is to step into a palimpsest of history where past and present overlap. Each archaeological discovery, each inscription, each fragment of architecture contributes to a deeper understanding of a civilization that shaped the foundations of science, philosophy, and literature. The legacy of Alexandria challenges us to consider what it means to preserve knowledge, to honor inquiry, and to foster environments where ideas can flourish. Its story invites reflection not only on the achievements of the ancient world, but on the responsibilities of the present. For as long as humanity seeks to understand itself and the cosmos, the memory of Alexandria will remain a guiding light, an enduring symbol of the power of curiosity and the promise of shared wisdom. As the centuries passed, Alexandria's place in the ancient imagination grew even as its physical institutions changed or disappeared. Writers who never walked its streets described it in glowing terms, repeating stories of unparalleled scholarship and unmatched intellectual ambition. The reality of the library, its practices, its contents, its structure, became intertwined with legend. Many details were lost to time, but what survived continued to shape the city's reputation. Even accounts written long after its decline portrayed Alexandria as a beacon of knowledge, a place where the world's wisdom had once been gathered under a single roof. The symbolic weight of the library came from more than its size. It represented an idea that human understanding could be expanded through careful study, debate, and preservation. The scholars who worked within its halls treated learning as a form of stewardship. They copied texts not merely to store them, but to refine, compare, and correct. The act of reading became a dialogue with the past, an attempt to carry forward insights that might otherwise be forgotten. This philosophy influenced later traditions, particularly within the Islamic Golden Age, when scholars in Baghdad, Damascus, and Cordoba drew on Alexandrian methods to collect and analyze texts from across the known world. Even as new intellectual centers emerged, Alexandria's legacy persisted through these channels. Mathematicians studied Euclid's elements, which, though not exclusively Alexandrian, had been shaped and preserved by the city's scholars. Physicians referenced the work of Herophilus and Eratosthenes. Philosophers wrote commentaries on Aristotle that relied on earlier Alexandrian editions, the city's influence radiated outward in ways that transcended its physical decline. Meanwhile, Alexandria itself continued to evolve. Under Byzantine rule, the city remained important as an administrative center and a hub of maritime trade. Grain shipments still flowed from the Nile through its harbors, supporting populations far beyond Egypt. Religious life became increasingly shaped by Christian institutions. Churches rose across the city, and theological debates drew attention from across the empire. Alexandria's Christian community produced influential thinkers whose writings would shape doctrine for centuries. Yet the city's multicultural character endured. Greek, Coptic, Jewish, and other communities lived side by side, contributing to the city's distinct identity. Markets remained vibrant. Streets echoed with conversations in multiple languages. The intellectual traditions of the past, though transformed, remained part of the city's cultural fabric. Even when political tensions flared, Alexandria maintained an atmosphere of exchange that connected it to the broader Mediterranean world. Natural disasters also shaped Alexandria's destiny. Earthquakes struck the region repeatedly, damaging buildings and altering the coastline. Some quakes were powerful enough to affect the Lighthouse of Pharos, whose structure required repairs over generations. Eventually, a series of earthquakes in the medieval period destroyed the tower entirely, leaving only foundations beneath the waves. The lighthouse had stood for nearly 1,000 years, guiding sailors and symbolizing Alexandria's prominence. Its fall marked the end of an era, though its memory endured through descriptions and artistic depictions. Other structures suffered similar fates. Parts of the royal quarter collapsed into the harbour, where they remained hidden for centuries. The palaces, the administrative buildings, and the ceremonial spaces that once hosted rulers and scholars gradually disappeared beneath layers of silt and seawater. What remained on land was often repurposed by new generations. Heavy stones from ancient monuments became materials for medieval fortifications or new religious structures. Alexandria adapted, recycled, and reinvented itself again and again. Despite these transformations, the essence of the city persisted. Travelers who visited Alexandria during the early Islamic period described a place rich with history, where ruins and relics blended with new constructions. Scholars in this era continued to value the city's intellectual heritage. The works of ancient authors circulated widely. Commentaries and translations preserved fragments of Alexandrian knowledge. Medical texts, mathematical treatises, and philosophical works, many of which had passed through Alexandria centuries earlier, became foundational to scientific inquiry in the medieval world. In the modern era, archaeological discoveries have illuminated aspects of Alexandria's past that were once little more than legend. Underwater excavations in the harbour revealed monumental statues, temple foundations, and architectural fragments from the Ptolemaic period. These findings confirm descriptions by ancient writers and provide physical evidence of the city's grandeur. Among the discoveries are fragments of the royal palaces associated with the Ptolemies and Cleopatra VII, submerged after earthquakes and gradually preserved by the sediments of the sea. On land, excavations uncovered streets, mosaics, and remnants of buildings from various periods of the city's history. These layers reveal the complexity of Alexandria's development. Structures from the Greek, Roman, Byzantine, and early Islamic periods overlap, demonstrating how the city evolved while retaining traces of its earlier form. Artifacts found in these excavations, coins, inscriptions, pottery, tools, offer glimpses into the daily lives of Alexandrians across centuries. Modern scholars also trace the intellectual legacy of Alexandria through surviving manuscripts and references in later works. Although the original library no longer exists, its influence can be felt in the survival of classical texts that were copied, edited, or studied by Alexandrian scholars. Without their efforts, many works of literature, philosophy, and science might have been lost. The city's role in preserving and shaping knowledge cannot be overstated. It stands as a testament to what can be achieved when societies invest in learning and value the exchange of ideas. Today, Alexandria remains a city where the past and present coexist. Its modern streets follow ancient patterns. Traditional markets operate alongside contemporary shops. The sea that once carried ships filled with scrolls and goods still laps against the same coastline. Visitors can walk along the corniche and imagine the lighthouse rising above the waves, or stand near the site of the ancient library and reflect on the scholars who once gathered there. While much has changed, the city's history continues to resonate through its modern landscape. This continuity reflects the enduring power of Alexandria's story. The city embodies both the achievements and the vulnerabilities of human civilization. Its rise demonstrates the incredible potential of cultural exchange and intellectual collaboration. Its challenges reveal the fragility of institutions built on political support. Its legacy reminds us that knowledge is both precious and easily threatened, requiring constant effort to preserve. In reflecting on Alexandria's history, one finds a narrative that speaks to the broader human experience. Civilizations grow through innovation and shared understanding. They falter when division overshadows cooperation. They endure when ideas are carried forward by those who value them. Alexandria's story, in all its complexity, continues to offer insights into the nature of progress and the importance of protecting the pursuit of knowledge. The ancient city may no longer stand in its original form, but its influence echoes through libraries, universities, and research institutions around the world. The ideals that guided its scholars remain central to the mission of learning today: to seek truth, to question assumptions, and to share discoveries for the benefit of all. As long as these principles endure, the spirit of Alexandria lives on. The deeper one looks into Alexandria's history, the clearer it becomes that its influence did not end with the physical disappearance of its greatest monuments. Instead, its legacy flowed outward through the very people who once walked its streets, studied in its halls, or engaged with the texts it preserved. Ideas nurtured in Alexandria traveled across continents, carried by merchants, scholars, and translated manuscripts. Its intellectual methods were adopted by later civilizations, shaping scientific inquiry, philosophical thought, and literary criticism. What made the city extraordinary was not simply its collection of scrolls, but its approach to understanding the world. This approach was rooted in comparison, analysis, and synthesis. Alexandrian scholars compared versions of texts to produce more accurate editions. They analyzed mathematical proofs, astronomical data, and medical observations, seeking patterns and relationships. They synthesized knowledge from various cultures, integrating Egyptian, Babylonian, Persian, and Greek ideas into a broader framework. This inclusive method fostered innovation. When Eratosthenes calculated the Earth's circumference, he did so by combining geographical reports, astronomical observations, and mathematical reasoning. His work demonstrated not only intellectual brilliance, but also the value of drawing insights from diverse sources. The city's emphasis on preservation also had lasting effects. By copying texts, the library ensured that many works survived long enough to be studied by later scholars. Even though countless scrolls were lost over time, the influence of Alexandrian editions and commentaries can still be traced. Philosophers, scientists, and writers in the medieval and Renaissance periods often relied on manuscripts that had passed through Alexandria or been shaped by its methods. For them, the city represented a link to antiquity, a bridge connecting distant eras through the continuity of learning. Alexandria's geographic position contributed to its enduring relevance. Situated between the Mediterranean and the Nile, it stood at the crossroads of Africa, Asia, and Europe. This location facilitated the movement of goods, but it also encouraged the movement of ideas. Travelers from different regions converged in the city, bringing with them stories, knowledge, and perspectives that enriched its intellectual life. Even as political control changed hands, Alexandria maintained this role as a cultural meeting point. Its harbours remained active, its markets vibrant, and its conversations animated by influences from across the known world. Throughout its history, Alexandria demonstrated the power of urban diversity. While tensions occasionally erupted, the city's multicultural environment fostered creativity and innovation. Greek scholars learned from Egyptian priests, Jewish thinkers engaged with Greek philosophy. Early Christian theologians encountered scientific and philosophical traditions that shaped their interpretations. This exchange created a dynamic intellectual ecosystem that contributed to Alexandria's achievements. The city thrived when dialogue flourished. It faltered when division prevailed. The stories of Alexandria's institutions illustrate this pattern. The Mouseion and the library succeeded because they encouraged collaboration and open inquiry. Scholars living and working together exchanged ideas freely, challenging assumptions and developing new approaches. Their work transcended individual disciplines, reflecting a holistic understanding of knowledge. But when political instability and ideological conflict disrupted this environment, intellectual activity became fragmented. Without a supportive and cohesive community, even the greatest institutions struggled to survive. In considering Alexandria's decline, it is important to recognize that the city did not collapse suddenly. Rather, it underwent a gradual transformation shaped by external pressures and internal changes. The Roman conquest altered its political structure. The rise of Christianity redefined its cultural and religious landscape. Economic shifts and natural disasters reshaped its physical environment. Each of these factors contributed to the erosion of the conditions that had allowed the Library and Mouseion to flourish. Yet the city adapted, continuing to play important roles in administration, theology, and trade. Modern discoveries have illuminated aspects of this transition. Excavations reveal layers of construction that reflect changes in architectural styles, religious practices, and urban planning. Beneath medieval and modern structures lie traces of Greek and Roman buildings. Beneath those, in some cases, lie remnants of even earlier settlements. These layers demonstrate that Alexandria was not simply a place of rise and fall, but a city that repeatedly reinvented itself, absorbing influences from different eras while leaving its own mark on the world. Underwater archaeology has been particularly revealing. The remains of the royal quarter, long thought lost, have emerged from the seabed, offering tangible evidence of Alexandria's ancient grandeur. Statues of pharaohs and Ptolemaic rulers, fragments of temples, and collapsed walls evoke a world once filled with ceremony and power. The discovery of these ruins challenges earlier assumptions about the city's disappearance and highlights the complexity of its historical record. Much of Alexandria's past lies not in libraries or museums, but beneath the very waters that sustained its harbours. The modern city, vibrant and densely populated, continues to coexist with this ancient heritage. Buildings rest atop forgotten streets. Markets operate above long-buried courtyards. The layers of history are woven into daily life in ways that are both subtle and profound. For those who walk its streets today, Alexandria offers a connection to a past that shaped the foundations of global knowledge. Its story, though altered by time, remains present in the names of neighborhoods, the forms of buildings, and the memories preserved in historical texts. In the broader context of world history, Alexandria stands as a testament to the transformative power of human collaboration. Its achievements were not the result of a single ruler, scholar, or institution, but of countless individuals contributing their skills, perspectives, and questions. The city thrived when curiosity was cultivated and supported. It faltered when intolerance and conflict undermined that foundation. This pattern resonates across time, offering lessons for future generations about the importance of sustaining environments that foster open inquiry. For modern scholars, Alexandria provides both inspiration and caution. Its success demonstrates what can be accomplished when societies invest in knowledge and value diverse perspectives. Its challenges reveal the fragility of such achievements in the face of political and social upheaval. The city's legacy encourages us to reflect on the responsibilities that come with intellectual progress, the need to protect access to information, to encourage dialogue, and to preserve cultural heritage. As the narrative of Alexandria's history draws toward the present, the themes that emerge are deeply human: the desire to understand the world, the struggle to preserve knowledge, the tensions that arise from diversity, and the resilience of ideas. These themes are not confined to antiquity. They continue to shape societies today. Alexandria's story, therefore, is not simply a lesson in history, but a mirror reflecting ongoing challenges and aspirations. The ancient city may no longer be visible in its original form, but its influence endures in countless ways. It lives in the scientific methods that govern modern research, in the literary traditions that trace their roots to classical texts, and in the philosophical questions that continue to guide inquiry. It lives in the libraries and universities that carry forward the mission of preservation and discovery. And it lives in the minds of those who, inspired by its legacy, seek to expand the boundaries of human understanding. Alexandria invites us to imagine what is possible when curiosity is embraced and shared. It reminds us that knowledge is not static but dynamic, shaped by the people who pursue it. And it encourages us to consider how future generations will judge the intellectual choices of the present. In this way, the city's legacy remains vibrant, an enduring testament to the power of learning and the human spirit's relentless drive to explore. As modern scholarship continues to uncover fragments of Alexandria's past, the city's story becomes clearer, yet also more mysterious. Each discovery contributes a piece to the mosaic, revealing details that illuminate ancient practices, beliefs, and achievements. But at the same time, the full picture remains just out of reach, fragmented by time, and shaped by the biases of those who recorded the past. This paradox of knowing more while realizing how much remains unknown mirrors the experience of the ancient scholars who once walked Alexandria's streets. They too sought answers in incomplete texts, piecing together insights from scattered sources. Their work reminds us that knowledge is often provisional, built upon the foundations of earlier inquiries, and always open to revision. Alexandrian scholars approached their tasks with a balance of respect for tradition and a willingness to challenge assumptions. They compared manuscripts, corrected errors, and developed theories that pushed the boundaries of understanding. This combination of preservation and innovation became one of the city's defining characteristics. It also explains why Alexandria continues to captivate historians, archaeologists, and readers alike. The myths surrounding the library's destruction contribute to its enduring allure. Stories of catastrophic fires, violent invasions, or ideological purges have shaped popular imagination for centuries. Yet ancient sources provide limited and often contradictory accounts. Some mention accidental fires during military conflicts. Others imply gradual loss through neglect or shifting priorities. In truth, the library's demise was likely not a single dramatic event, but a slow process extending over many generations. Scrolls decayed, collections were dispersed, institutions changed, and the conditions that once supported large-scale scholarship gradually disappeared. This gradual decline stands in contrast to the dramatic narratives often associated with the library. It was not simply burned to ashes in a single night. Rather, it faded as political support waned, as new intellectual centres emerged, and as the social fabric of the city transformed. The tragedy lies not in a single catastrophic moment, but in the cumulative effect of time, conflict, and indifference. Yet even in its decline, the library's influence persisted, carried forward by scholars who preserved fragments of its legacy. The image of ancient Alexandria often evokes a sense of longing, a yearning for a time when curiosity was nurtured and knowledge pursued without hesitation. But this idealized vision obscures the complexities of the city. Alexandria thrived not because it was free from conflict or uncertainty, but because it embraced diversity and conversation. The interactions among different cultures, religions, and intellectual traditions created a dynamic environment where ideas could flourish. This diversity became both a source of strength and a cause of tension. The same currents that produced innovation sometimes fueled discord. Understanding Alexandria requires acknowledging these complexities. The city's achievements were extraordinary, but not inevitable. They arose from a unique convergence of geography, politics, economics, and human ambition. Its challenges were equally real. Political instability, religious strife, and natural disasters shaped its trajectory. Yet through these challenges, Alexandria's core identity remained anchored in the pursuit of knowledge. Even as institutions shifted and populations changed, the city's intellectual spirit endured. In reflecting on Alexandria's history, one can trace the contours of a broader narrative about human civilization. The city's rise demonstrates the transformative power of vision and collaboration. Its endurance reveals the strength of communities built on shared purpose. Its decline underscores the fragility of institutions that depend on political will, and its legacy highlights the lasting impact of intellectual generosity. The willingness to collect, preserve, and share ideas across cultures and generations. Today, the Bibliotheca Alexandrina stands near the site of the ancient library, intended as a modern revival of its spirit. The building's design, with its slanted circular facade and engraved scripts from different writing systems, reflects a global commitment to scholarship and cultural exchange. It serves as a reminder that the pursuit of knowledge continues even in a world vastly transformed from that of the Ptolemies. Visitors from around the globe come to study, reflect, and engage with the past, contributing to an ongoing dialogue that spans centuries. The modern library cannot recreate the ancient one, nor does it attempt to. Instead, it honors the values that once animated Alexandria: openness, curiosity, and a desire to bridge differences through understanding. In this way, the legacy of the ancient city finds new expression. The Bibliotheca Alexandrina stands as a testament to humanity's enduring fascination with knowledge, echoing the mission of the scholars who once studied along the colonnades of the Mouseion. The story of Alexandria invites us to consider how we preserve and transmit knowledge in our own time. Just as ancient scrolls required careful copying to survive, digital information requires ongoing vigilance to remain accessible. The means of preservation may have changed, but the underlying challenges remain. What do we choose to save? Whose voices do we amplify? How do we ensure that knowledge endures beyond the moment of its creation? These questions connect the ancient world to the present, revealing the timeless nature of the intellectual endeavor. As the narrative of Alexandria draws to a close, it becomes clear that the city's true legacy lies not in its monuments or its rulers, but in its pursuit of understanding. Its scholars measured the earth, mapped the heavens, wrote poetry, studied the body, and debated the nature of reality. They preserved stories, analyzed texts, and challenged assumptions. Their work shaped the foundations of scientific, literary, and philosophical traditions that continue to guide inquiry today. The city they inhabited may have changed beyond recognition, but the spirit that animated it lives on wherever people seek to understand the world through reason, observation, and imagination. The legacy of Alexandria endures in the quiet corners of libraries, in the thoughtful pause of a student contemplating a difficult question, and in the collaborative efforts of individuals working to expand the boundaries of knowledge. It endures each time someone chooses curiosity over indifference, wisdom over ignorance, connection over isolation. In the end, Alexandria reminds us that ideas are among humanity's most enduring creations. They can survive the fall of empires, the loss of buildings, and the erosion of time. They travel across continents, adapt to new contexts, and inspire new generations. The ancient city may lie buried beneath modern streets and submerged beneath seawater, but its intellectual spirit remains a vital presence in the story of civilization. To remember Alexandria is to remember the power of knowledge, to recognize its ability to illuminate, challenge, and unite. It is to honor the scholars, scribes, teachers, and thinkers whose dedication preserved the insights of countless cultures. And it is to acknowledge that the pursuit of understanding is a shared and ongoing endeavor, one that binds us to the past and opens possibilities for the future. Alexandria's story does not end in ruins or legend. It continues wherever knowledge is cherished and curiosity encouraged. It continues in every library, every classroom, every research institute, and every mind that seeks to question, explore, and imagine. The city once built on a windswept coastline endures not in stone, but in spirit. A testament to human aspiration and the boundless journey of discovery.